The city of Florence glowed with the warmth of an early spring evening. Sunlight lingered across terracotta rooftops, spilling gold over the cobbled streets and settling into the shadows of narrow alleyways where the air carried the fragrance of jasmine and roasted coffee. Along the banks of the Arno River, music drifted from street performers, soft violin notes melting into the rhythmic clatter of footsteps on stone. The city seemed to hum with life, but among the crowd, there was one soul who sought quiet. Her name was Elena Moretti. At 27, she carried the aura of someone caught between worlds, a dreamer too restless for convention, an artist too uncertain of her own worth. She wandered with a sketchbook pressed to her chest, the edges worn from years of faithful use. Her auburn hair glimmered when touched by the fading light, and her eyes, green as old Venetian glass, scanned every corner, always searching for beauty in overlooked places. To the world, she was another painter among many. To herself, she was still unfinished, her canvases reflecting both her hope and her fear. What if her art was never enough? That evening, as the bells of Santa Croce echoed through the square, she lowered herself onto the steps and began to draw. Charcoal whispered against the page, capturing arches, shadows, and the soft curve of light on the cathedral wall. Yet her concentration faltered. The pencil snapped under her fingers, a sharp reminder of imperfection. Frustration stirred in her chest. It was then that she noticed a figure nearby. He sat alone, absorbed in the pages of a weathered book. His presence carried both calm and intensity, as though the world moved more slowly around him. He was Daniel Hartman, 30 years old, a journalist who had fled the steel towers of New York in search of meaning. Dark hair curled at his temples. His face bore the marks of quiet exhaustion, yet his gaze, when lifted, held an unguarded depth. Their eyes met only briefly, yet the connection felt like recognition, as if some unseen thread had drawn their paths together. And though no words passed between them, something shifted. That night, Florence seemed different. Time bent around them. Elena wandered further than she had intended, and Daniel rose from his seat as if pulled by the same invisible current. By chance, or perhaps by fate, they both paused beneath the willow tree that leaned over the riverbank. Its branches swayed gently in the night breeze, draping shadows upon the water. The hours slipped away unnoticed as they remained there, two strangers sharing the same stillness. Around them, the city fell quiet, yet within their hearts a quiet storm was beginning. Neither fully understood why the presence of the other brought such unexpected calm, nor why they felt as though the night had been waiting for this meeting. When midnight arrived, the bells rang once more across Florence, reminding them of reality. Yet neither wished to leave. They lingered under the willow until the moon carved their silhouettes side by side into the cobblestones. It was the beginning of something fragile, unnamed, yet undeniable. The world had shifted for them both, though neither dared to admit it aloud. And so, the first chapter of their story closed not with promises, but with unspoken possibility, the kind that makes the heart tremble with both wonder and fear. Autumn deepened, and the city wore a golden cloak of falling leaves. Anna often wandered through the botanical garden near her office, a place where silence and nature embraced her better than the walls of her small apartment. She carried her sketchbook there, drawing twisted branches, fading flowers, and the quiet paths that no one seemed to notice. It was there, among the marble benches and the fragrance of damp earth, that she saw him again. Michael, the man from the station, stood by the fountain. He was reading, his brow furrowed in concentration, the book trembling slightly in his hands as if his mind were elsewhere. Anna stopped, unsure whether fate was toying with her or offering her a chance she dared not expect. 4 days afterward, she returned to the garden, half in hope, half in fear. Sometimes he was there, sometimes not. Yet the thought of him began to weave its way into her sketches, into her sleepless nights. She drew his silhouette without realizing it, the strong lines of his posture, the curve of his jaw she had seen only once. It frightened her, this pull toward a stranger whose name she did not even know. One evening, rain had fallen and the paths glistened. She sat beneath the wrought iron arch, her notebook open on her lap, when she heard the sound of footsteps. Michael approached, his expression distant, almost burdened. Though they did not speak, their eyes met once more, and in that gaze lingered a recognition deeper than words, as if their souls were whispering where voices could not. After he left, Anna pressed her sketchbook to her chest. The silence around her had shifted. The garden no longer belonged only to her. It carried the echo of him, the weight of a presence that made her heart ache with questions. Who was he? Why did destiny insist on crossing their paths? And yet, she knew, something fragile and profound had begun to grow between the cracks of ordinary days. Something that frightened her and thrilled her all the same. Winter crept quietly into the city, laying frost on rooftops and drawing its pale breath across the river. The garden where Anna often found solace had grown bare, its once vivid colors muted beneath gray skies. Still, she came, and still, sometimes Michael was there. He carried with him an air of quiet sorrow, like someone who bore more weight than the world should place on one pair of shoulders. Anna, from a distance, noticed the way he lingered by the fountain, as though searching for something that wasn't there. His hands often tightened around the book he carried, not as though he read it, but as though it anchored him to the present. Through whispered conversations she overheard between passing strangers, Anna pieced together fragments of his story. Michael had once been a promising architect, known for designs that breathed life into stone and glass. But something had broken him, a tragedy, though the details remained blurred in the mouths of those who spoke his name. Her heart ached, though she hardly knew him. She wondered what loss could carve such shadows into a man's face. He seemed unreachable, a figure woven of silence and pain, yet fate kept pulling him across her path as if urging her to understand. One night, snow fell heavily, cloaking the city in white. Anna walked home through the hush of winter streets, and for the first time, she saw him outside the garden. He stood beneath a flickering street lamp, gazing at the closed windows of a bookstore, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she almost approached, almost broke the fragile thread of silence that bound them. But fear rooted her to the ground. When she finally reached her apartment, her sketchbook lay open on the desk. Without thinking, she began to draw, not the city, not the trees, but him. His face etched with sorrow, his eyes haunted by things unsaid, his solitude reflected in the empty streets. It was then Anna realized this stranger was no longer just a fleeting figure in her days. He had become part of her nights, her thoughts, her art, a mystery she yearned to solve, even as she feared the truth might wound her more deeply than the not knowing. The new year dawned with pale light and brittle air. The city stirred slowly from winter's slumber, yet Anna felt more awake than ever. The pull toward Michael had grown stronger, though they had exchanged no words. She lived between moments of silence, the times when she saw him, and the times when she longed to. In the garden, she often pretended to sketch, though her pencil moved with little purpose. Her eyes betrayed her, straying toward him, reading his gestures as though they were verses of an unfinished poem. Sometimes he noticed. Their gazes met across the frost-bitten paths, lingering too long to be accidental. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, curiosity, perhaps even the quiet ache of two souls standing on the same edge of loneliness. Yet, just as swiftly as it grew, distance would rush in to separate them. He left abruptly, vanishing into the city's vastness. Days, sometimes weeks, passed with no sign of him. Anna told herself she imagined everything, that it was foolish to weave meaning into chance meetings. But then, without warning, he returned, and the fragile thread pulled taut once again. One late afternoon, as the sky blushed with the colors of a fading sun, Anna glimpsed him leaving the garden with another woman. She was elegant, her hand resting gently on his arm, her presence carrying familiarity. Anna's heart tightened. Perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps he was not a man marked by solitude, but one already belonging to another. That night, sleep abandoned her. She sat by her window, watching snow dissolve into rain, listening to the city's distant hum. Her thoughts circled endlessly. Who was she to him? Why did Anna feel betrayed by a man she had never truly met? Still, beneath the sting of doubt, a deeper truth unsettled her. She wanted to know him, to step beyond the fragile veil of glances and silences. But fear whispered louder. What if the mystery was sweeter than the reality? What if his world had no room for her? And yet, somewhere in her chest, a quiet hope persisted. The kind of hope that refuses to be silenced, even when reason begs it to fade. Spring unfurled across the city with gentle insistence, brushing color back into its weary streets. Blossoms scattered along the garden paths, and with them, Anna's heart seemed to breathe again. She had not seen Michael in weeks, and the ache of his absence gnawed at her more deeply than she wished to admit. But fate, stubborn as ever, chose its moment. One quiet afternoon, she found him seated on the very bench where she so often sketched. This time, he was not reading. His hands rested idly, his gaze fixed on the restless fountain. For the first time, Anna dared to move closer, her steps hesitant but steady, as though guided by something stronger than fear. She sat a few paces away, the silence between them heavy but not unfriendly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, slowly, Michael turned his head. Their eyes met, and something shifted, not the fleeting glance of strangers, but the recognition of two people who had circled one another long enough. In that wordless exchange, the walls began to crumble. He offered the faintest of smiles, fragile yet sincere, and Anna felt her breath catch. She did not know his story, nor he hers, but the distance between them seemed less insurmountable than before. The following days unfolded like cautious steps on uncertain ground. They found themselves meeting more often, sometimes by chance, sometimes by quiet intention. Though words remained scarce, gestures grew braver, a nod of greeting, a smile that lingered, the shared stillness of watching petals drift into the water. And yet, beneath the fragile beginnings, shadows still lingered. Anna sensed the weight Michael carried, a sorrow too vast to name. She longed to reach for it, to understand, but something held her back. Perhaps it was respect, perhaps fear. Perhaps the unspoken truth that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Still, hope stirred like spring itself, fragile, persistent, refusing to yield. For the first time, Anna believed the silence between them might one day blossom into something more than glances and passing moments. Something real and dangerous and breathtaking. Something that could change both their lives forever. Summer arrived with its golden heat, and the garden grew wild with life. Yet within its bloom, Anna sensed that Michael's silence had grown heavier. His smiles, though genuine, carried a shadow. His presence, though steady, felt guarded, as if he stood at the edge of confession but could not cross it. At last, one evening as dusk painted the sky in violet hues, the truth began to surface. Michael remained on the bench long after the paths had emptied, his gaze distant. Anna, unable to ignore the ache in her chest, gathered her courage and sat beside him. Though words had never passed between them, in that moment it felt inevitable that they must. And so, quietly Michael spoke. His voice was low, roughened by long silence. He told her of the life he once had, the career that filled him with purpose, the love he believed unshakable, the family he dreamed of building. And then, the fracture. A sudden accident that had taken his fiancée years before, leaving behind only absence where joy once lived. Since then, he confessed, he had walked through the world like a man half alive, unable to step beyond the walls of grief. Anna listened, her heart trembling with every word. The sorrow in his story explained the shadow she had glimpsed, the weight she had felt but never understood. And yet, as he spoke, she realized something deeper, that by telling her, he was letting her into the silence he had guarded so fiercely. When he finished, the air between them was thick with vulnerability. Michael lowered his gaze, as though ashamed of the pain he carried. But Anna, gently, placed her sketchbook in his hands. Within its pages, he found not only drawings of trees and flowers, but of him, his silhouette, his expressions, the quiet sorrow she had traced in countless strokes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, his hand closed over hers, warm and trembling. It was not a promise, nor a declaration, but it was something greater than silence, the beginning of trust. The garden seemed to exhale around them, its leaves whispering in approval. Anna's heart beat wildly, not with fear, but with hope. For the first time, she believed that love, fragile, patient, and brave, could bloom even in the soil of sorrow. And as twilight deepened, she knew their story was only just beginning. Days unfolded differently after that evening. The silence that once stood between Anna and Michael was no longer empty. It was filled with the memory of shared words, of confessions too heavy to remain hidden. They spoke more often now, not always of grief, but of small things. The books they loved, the way the city seemed to change with each season, the places they dreamed of seeing one day. For Anna, these moments were luminous. She had lived so long in solitude that every shared laugh, every glance, felt like a gift. For Michael, they were tentative steps out of the shadows. He still carried his sorrow, but it no longer defined the entirety of his world. He found, in Anna's quiet presence, the possibility of healing. And yet, healing is never a straight path. There were days when Michael withdrew into himself, days when Anna feared she had reached too far into wounds not yet closed. Doubt sometimes whispered to her, perhaps he would never be free enough to love again. Perhaps she was only a reminder of what he had lost. But then he would return, sometimes with nothing more than a gentle smile, and it was enough to keep her hope alive. One evening, as they walked together through the garden now alive with summer roses, Michael stopped. His gaze lingered on the blooms, their petals open wide to the fading sun. "I never thought I'd stand here again," he said softly. "Never thought I'd feel anything again." His voice faltered, but Anna felt the tremor of truth in it. She did not answer with words. Instead, she slipped her hand into his. He held it tightly, not as a drowning man clings to rescue, but as someone who had finally chosen to live again. For Anna, the moment was both fragile and infinite. She knew their path would not be simple. Love born from shadows never is. But she also knew something deeper. They had crossed the threshold from silence into possibility. The story of grief was no longer the only story Michael carried. Now, there was the story of them. And though it was only just beginning, it felt like the first true dawn after a long and endless night. Autumn returned, gentle and golden, carrying with it the echo of their first unspoken meetings. But now, the garden no longer held only silence and shadows. It had become a place of laughter, of quiet walks, of confessions spoken beneath the turning leaves. Michael had changed. The sorrow in his eyes had not vanished. Some losses remained etched forever, but it no longer ruled him. Where once he had lived as though frozen in grief, he now moved with the cautious strength of someone learning to trust life again. And Anna, who had once watched him from afar, now stood beside him, her hand woven into his, her heart steady in its choice. The day of confession came quietly, without grand gesture. They sat by the fountain where it had all begun, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. Michael turned to her, his voice unsteady but sure. "I thought love had ended for me," he said. "But then you appeared, and little by little, you showed me that life was still waiting, that my heart still knew how to feel." Anna felt tears sting her eyes, not of sorrow, but of joy. She answered not with words, but with the certainty of her gaze, the warmth of her touch. And in that moment, the garden seemed to bloom once more, though autumn held it in its grasp. Their kiss was not rushed, not desperate. It was gentle, patient, a seal upon the promise that love, even when scarred, could be reborn. Seasons would come and go, as they always had. But for Anna and Michael, the garden would forever remain the place where silence gave way to love, where grief yielded to hope, and where two souls, once lost, had finally found each other. And so their story ended not with loss, but with beginning. A reminder that love, though fragile, is the most enduring bloom of all.